it ever. Great. Okay, so I'm gonna skip the intro to me. I'm an old iOS developer.
Everybody, I can do it.
trying to still code. Some days are harder than others, but still kind of cool. So anyhow, so we kind of went through like 13, I think it was 13 chapters of the book, combined with SwiftUI, with Peter Fries. And then we kind of took this challenge of taking an existing app, a sample app that someone had done for showing weather information. So let me actually share, where is my screen here? I'll just do the desktop because it's just easier. And I don't know how many of you, so first actually, can folks say whether they actually tried this or not? You can put it on chat. And don't feel bad. I mean, just say I tried it. I didn't have time to try it. So that way I kind of know partially. Okay. Who else? I haven't, but I'm still catching up. Sure. Should I try? Jay, yep, it worked on network layer and partial UI. Okay, nice. I want to see what you did for UI. I didn't have time to try it, but looked over the app. Yeah. And I'm just trying to see. Okay, I'm trying to find where the I think I had, oops, sorry, that was the wrong one. I was trying to see how to navigate. Was that which one? That's the problem when you have like multiple. Okay, maybe can someone put the link to the weather GitHub? Because I was gonna show because I kind of made the change. So if any one of you can put it on the chat, that would be great. Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. And then sometimes it could be, I just got this new laptop, so I think sometimes I might have not set it to be, okay, here we go. So one reason I picked this app was that it was relatively easy, in terms of like simple, I should say, in terms of like what it's doing. But at the same time, it did follow some good practices. So if you look, it had, its views, the different views that, it uses. And actually just to show you guys, that's kind of, let me delete that. Okay, so the app kind of looks like this. And then when you like searching, then it shows you for, I think it's like 8 days of like what the temperature forecast will be. And then it also does it, two different ways, like a horizontal scrolling and a vertical scrolling. And you can't tap on these. It just shows this, but he has a nice way of kind of like the hourly view, the search city view, the current weather view. So he has kind of divided into the different views, and then he has his models. So there is the API, which actually, and we're going to be doing some updates. So there's a weather API, so that it gives you the current URL based on your location. And then there's like a network manager, and he's kept it generic. So it's not, you could have just had it because he is returning this weather response. It could have just returned, but he's trying to be good by using generic so that, later, if you're returning other types of stuff, you can do that too. And there's a set of errors of different things that could be returned through the network. Let's see. And then, there's time in terms of like formatting, and the weather itself is kind of what we map from the JSON that we get from that weather API. and it's codable, and we're mapping it to the different fields. So in case and here's the weather response. That's the actual mapping of what we get from there. It's kind of a funky JSON, so it kind of returns there is like a date and a temperature and then the detail inside it. And then you can actually take a look at what JSON gets returned from the API. But anyways, I thought it was like a decent, and of course there's the view model. And this weather view model is used by the views. And one of the things it does, it does get, the current, because when you're actually passing like the name of a city, it uses place marks to actually figure out what the geolocation is. Because when you're making the call, you're actually passing the location of that city. There is another interesting thing is it's kind of already using a little bit of Combine, because you have this weather, which is the result of the weather response, and city. And then if you look at here, there's a whole bunch of computed properties for like the icon, the temperature, the humidity, that uses that weather object, but different attributes. And the nice thing about it is that once you make weather published, and if weather changes at any point, then you're basically, if your views are using any of these computer properties, they will also update, which is kind of nice. So this all looks good. The main thing is, the first thing that I was trying to change was like, okay, can I go and, we learned from the book, on the networking layer, can I make this fetch weather? Right now, it's the more traditional way where you pass the URL and you pass the completion. And then, it goes and makes the calls and then calls the completion. And can I change that to follow more the combined approach of networking, where we still use the URL session shared data task, but we're going to use the URL session shared data task publisher and have it that, you can subscribe to it and get the result and sort of update whatever, assign it to one of your fields. So it looks like, Jay, you said you got the network part done. Is that the case? Because I want, maybe before I'll just do it.
Can you hear me?
There's a little bit of echoing. Yeah, so looks like you said you worked on the network layer. Did you complete it?
I did finish the network layer. The only problem is I was stuck at an error which I'm unable to resolve it. So
Okay.
what I did is like there are two parts to the getting the API for weather, right? One is to get the geocode address. So from the city you get the coordinates, and then that coordinate you pass it to the actual weather API that was used. So
so you were doing that combined. Okay, I see. So you
I
were
used future somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't do that yet. And that could be after this, we can, yeah. So then you're basically sort of chaining two things together, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I use the futures to get the coordinates for a city. And once I get the coordinate, I use a regular publisher to actually get the weather data.
I see. And that's the thing I have to, so I did it, but I didn't do the location part, which actually would be the next thing to try. So yeah, what Jay is speaking, because this is actually kind of like a two-step process because when we go, when we're actually doing this, getting a weather for a city, we're actually have to find the locations for that city. And then basically based on that coordinate, we then make the call, this URL. So if I show you guys this part, so there's a get weather internal. So let me show you how that works. Okay, sorry. Should be sometimes, yeah. Okay, so I'll start it here. So there's this get weather, and it actually starts from, let me see. Yeah. Then there's this get location. I think, let me go back to the, where do we have here? Okay. Okay. So kind of the ordering is, although I kind of changed it, that, we're first passing the location, then getting what the URL would be for that location. And then calling this internal weather, where it's passing the city and the URL string. But the URL string, as I mentioned, kind of uses the location for that particular city. And then basically, then it calls the network manager. And I think Jay wanted to make this whole thing, published so that, the fetching of the location itself, it's something that we could have a publisher for. And the future thing that he was mentioning, that future is something that will happen asynchronously, and sometime in future we get a result from it, and then we can pass that result to another publisher and then get the response of that. I just did, so I kind of was bad. I only did, but now you have tasked me. I will also do the location part. So I only changed the fetching the weather once we have a URL to pass. And if you remember, what I was mentioning is that the old way was, you pass a URL and then you have a completion. And here we're going to change it to a publisher. So the first thing we kind of do is, instead of passing a completion as a second parameter, we're going to have the result of this be any publisher, where it's returning. And again, because it's generic, so there's a little challenge there, but not too much, that, we are returning whatever that type is that we're, our network manager is kind of associated with. And then if it fails, remember, sometimes we would put that never because it wouldn't fail, but here we are considering that there could be errors. So we would be returning a network error. And I can show you guys how you can access that error once you're subscribing to this fetch weather. Now, as we remember, URL session does have a publisher. So Apple kind of already does that. So there's this data task publisher, and you can pass a URL to it. And the first thing you kind of want to do, there's different ways to do it. But let's say as part of just even trying to connect to that URL, there's an error. There's no connectivity, or there's like some networking error. So here's where we want to use this map error, where we get the error. Now we could have had just the generic error here, but a lot of times it's good practice to have a wrapper around your error, so it's easier, to support, those specific, types of errors. So In this case, we have this network error. So what it means that if I'm getting some generic like networking error, he already had this, that you can create a network error by just passing in the localized description of a general like NS error. And that's kind of useful where, most of the time you're just going to show what the error was anyways. If there are other times where you might want to also keep track of the error code or something, then this may be a little too simplistic. But for this case, yeah, it will create a network. And if at this point we ran into a problem, then it will return an error. And whoever was subscribing to this will, get a completion because an error happened, and then basically can process the error. But let's say that this went through. So then we do this try map. And the reason we do a try map is that there are times when as part of like, we want to check for if we were mapping, and actually in this case, like even if we did map, it would have been fine. Like map the data, and then but it would have thrown some, if at some point, like let's say data wasn't there or whatever, it just would throw again some generic error. But here what we do is, we're getting the data and the response, and then we can check for like, okay, is the response actual HTTP URL responses? Usually there are. But sometimes there could have been, again, some issue on the server that, it's sending some response that's not kind of mapping to a URL response. So we want to throw a appropriate error here. Then if the status code is not 200, which is what we're checking, we also want to throw an invalid response. Now, this is, again, a little simplistic because there are times when not only you do get a status code that's not 200, but also you may be getting an error in the response, like in the data. There is an error JSON that gets returned, and you want to parse that. Right now, we're not doing that, but a lot of times for your own app, you may be doing that, where you're not going to just throw an error at this point. You're going to check if it isn't, then you're going to try from the data to actually go and decode it and see if you can parse out the JSON for your error, and then map it to an appropriate error, and then throw that. But after all this, then we basically returning the data if all of this is good. So the kind of the output of this is data. And the nice thing is that then you can kind of map it to decode, where, you're basically saying, I want to get the type mapping to my generic, and here's the decoder that I'm using. And again, when you're doing this decode, it's possible that it's going to throw an error because, for instance, it just, when you're doing the JSON decoder is not parsing it properly. So again, we could do this map error where we're kind of massaging the error to be of our the network. So it's either that or we're wrapping it around our network error in this case. Another way, if you really wanted to have a specific error that was in your network error that was for like decoding error, then what you might have done, instead of doing this here, you could have just here when we get the data, also then do the decoding here, see if the decoding fails, and then throw the right one. So there's different ways you can process it in different operations. And then this erase to any publishers, because as you're sort of aggregating these publishers, the types are getting much more gnarlier. But at the end, we wanted to make it just be this. So this erase to any publisher will just return that any publisher with just these return types. Does this kind of make sense? Because I just threw all that, you know, I might have not.
I have a question. The operator from line 27 to 29, is that redundant? Because the one from 40 to 42 would cover it, right?
That's a good question. And yes, I as I was doing it, and you know, if I remove it, it doesn't complain at all. So if I just do this, my only thing was, I didn't know, and this is something we can find out if we're just, yeah, I guess, you know, I wasn't sure that, you know, it would just, if this map error is whatever is the result of the previous thing.
Oh.
And it doesn't seem to complain. So I have to do a test where, like, for instance, I'll make it like, you know, turn off the network and see, like, you know, what do we get when we're, that was my only, you know, question, because I think they're kind of going in a certain sequence, right? So that's why I wasn't sure that if I didn't do that, but it's a good question, and I will give it a try and definitely let you guys know, or when I'm going to make this available too. So if you guys want to play with it and change it, like some of the things, as I mentioned, like I haven't done the location one where we can make that be a publisher too. So but it's interesting. So this is kind of like the publisher part, but then, you know, we have to change the code that, you know, before was using the old call. So when it was calling the fetch weather, you know, it would just call the URL and the completion. Here, I changed it so that, you know, first I put it receive on dispatch queue. And the only reason is that because, actually, I kind of cheated here. I can also, and I'll change it, I can also assign it to value. But if this property is being used in the view, actually, that's a good question. We can remove this first. They said it's usually good practice that at the time that you get the response, that should be in the main thread, in case that, you know, that data is being used in a UI view. So that's why, you know, I saw that people do receive it on, you know, when the fetching can happen on a separate thread, but when you're actually getting the value, the response, that will be in the main thread. Kind of like how usually with the completion, what we do is inside the completion, we have the dispatch async main, and then we kind of take whatever we got in the completion and update things in the UI. It's kind of similar to that. But anyway, so there's two parts in when you're, I use the sync. Because I wanted to kind of distinguish the two parts. One was getting failures and errors and being able to see what the error was. And here I'm printing. So the next part I was actually going to do is add a published error message here that I could display then in the views. And then here, if I'm getting the failure mode and I'm seeing the error, then I could update my error message here. So right now I'm just printing, but the right thing would be to have an error message that you update and display, because this way kind of silently failing and, you know, the user wouldn't know. So there's two parts to this. So there is that, you know, receive completion, and then there's receive value. And at that point, if you get to this point, then you're basically, you have got the response. And once this weather changes, as I kind of mentioned, because it's published in the view model, then anything that's kind of using that, including all this computer properties, also change. And notice also I did the store in cancelable because, and then kind of defined here that because there is, if you just call this here and you're not storing it in a cancelable, it's sort of like a local, it's within the scope of this call. And when the call goes away, you're not gonna get the response back. But once you're put it in a cancelable, then it gets actually retained. And so it basically can go do its thing asynchronously and come back. And the other thing you can do with the cancelable is actually go and cancel any of these particular publishers for the response, so that for whatever reason, like maybe you're shutting down or whatever. But if you don't do that, then it actually doesn't work. And actually we can try it. So let's see. Okay, so notice everything is 0, and then let's go and actually I'm lazy, so I'm gonna the keyboard. Toronto. Oh. Here we go. Notice nothing happens. And the problem with this is that, it's like this goes in a call, and let's see what it tells us. It says result of the sync is unused. And part of it is that, it doesn't store it in the, it just kind of goes away after making this call, because it kind of treats it almost like a local local variable. So it's only when we store, the alternative is you can, if you have multiple kind of subscribers, then you want to use like a set of these cancelable. If there's like one, the other alternative would have been that I could have just done cancelable and then had it, that property be set to this. And that also retains this. And then when the response comes back, the event, basically it's that subscription to that event stays on. It doesn't go away. Does this make sense? So a lot of the things that, so again, kind of going back to this, things that would be good to do is, one is like, making also the location. Right now, those are two separate kind of calls. And really at the end, when I'm typing in my city and I hit search, which is kind of funky here, is like, you're not, I guess search in his view is searching for the weather, not like searching for a city or, but it's kind of like retrieving the weather. But when you hit that, you want those two processes to kind of happen together. Right now, it's like two separate kind of things. And that would be a nice kind of, we talked a little bit about what are good practices. And if we truly going the combined way, part of it's like simplifying these different calls, where we have like a callback for the location, then we get the location, then we update the URL, then we call the internal weather with that URL. It would be a little easier to see if it just was, to sort of, a publisher to get the location and then a subscriber that then gets the location, which is kind of like a subscriber to that future event that's coming, and then getting the weather, and you're subscribing then to that other event. What else? And in terms of like the UI, I was thinking, do folks had ideas of how, it's sort of using Combine right now, because as the weather updates, all of this kind of changes. So these are, this is the time. So if I go and, change this, then, there is once that weather changes, because it's published, all these other UI just get updated with that, which is really nice. So but I think that's something that you can do without, doing all the, taking the networking part and making that into Combine. Jay, did you have any idea about the UI other than this to use Combine, since you kind of mentioned you were working on a partial UI?
Yeah, I mean, like what I actually was going to say is that I had like used an approach where I'm validating the city name before. So whenever I pass in the string input for the city name, right, I call the two methods that I have in the service, and then that would validate if the city name is correct or not. So it's kind of similar approach that in the author group we saw it
Oh,
for
in the
Windows
book
right
when
the
you were
name.
typing
Yeah.
in, yes.
Although I was
Although,
unable
how
to
are you
successfully
validating the city? Like, how do you know it's a valid city?
I mean, I'm basing it on the geolocator API because like it might return
Oh, I
an
see.
error.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's the only
Okay.
way I can throw. But look, I have my own errors too. Like if the city is like less than 2 characters, there's no point in searching. So something on that lines. But I'm still stuck at a build error, which I got yesterday. So I'm kind of looking
Yeah,
into it.
sometimes that's the flip side of this, that, if you, yeah, if sometimes the syntax and the usage is kind of, a little tricky, so you can kind of get stuck. But, if you feel comfortable, it would be great if you can share your project. I mean, I'll be sharing this one and hoping maybe folks can take this and make it better or update. I'll add the location part and then push this. And then Navati is saying, so far I used the search text like we did in the book, haven't used the search button. Yeah, and I think initially I was thinking, in the book, when he was doing that whole search thing, the difference was that, it was like a lot of times, if you're trying to show some auto completion, like, what would be the right results for the search, where as you're typing in, you want to get some results back to, so you don't have to type in the whole entire thing. That one makes, that makes sense with putting Combine for that, and doing the debouncing. But here, I think, and that's why I think the search is a little misleading. It's like, it's assuming you have like, we may, I mean, it may, like, it's kind of we're not showing, like, if I'm doing LO before I hit search here and then actually look up the weather. If I wanted to make it easier for the user, there could be like something that shows like auto completions of potential city names, So it's like when it's Toronto, it's like Toronto. Yeah. So that's why this part, like putting it into Combine, may not make sense. Although I think what Jay was suggesting, that, we're not doing the debouncing, but, when you hit search, then it just, it may first try to go and verify if in this particular city, is correctly, because someone can mistype it. And then the way it works, that initially we're passing the city, but we're going to get from place mark, not a valid location. And then we can display that to the user and then pass that info. But as you, for folks who tried this, it is a little tricky to sort of feel comfortable, like, initially. That's why I sort of started with the simplest, like just taking the networking. And now, like, it makes sense that, okay, now that I got the networking, the other one that it seems like we're, it could be a nice combine wrapper is that, taking, because again, this geocode address string, we're sort of passing a city and then we get this place marks, and one can kind of pass, make it be a publisher or some result that happens in the future. And then once we get this, right now it's calling get weather, where it's passing the geolocation and then getting the URL string. But this whole thing could be, basically another operation on the result of that future that then basically gets that results and then makes calls the publisher for the actual network. So there's like multiple publishers here, and it's going to get tricky, but I think that would be close to what like Peter was showing in some of his examples, where you have one publisher. It was a different kind of thing where you're typing the username and then getting the user and then passing it there for seeing if it's unique or not. So multiple. And then Jay is saying, in case the city name is correct, we can throw a custom error. Yes, we can definitely. Now, some of you might say, well, this is all nice, but the completion thing wasn't too bad either, right? And I think this is kind of at the at where either way would work pretty well. I think if you have a bunch of, which there are in some apps, where you have really a whole chain of calls. I don't know if you guys have ever worked on apps like that, where you have to get one result and then pass that result to another API call and then get the result of that and pass it like multiple things. And then that really does get gnarly when you're doing these completions. It gets pretty ugly because, one completion to another, just, so that in that case, I really think, going the combined way where you're just chaining these publishers is a nicer way to go, and using this whole like futures concept and promise, like, once you get this, then pass it to this, it just makes the code when you look at it a lot simpler. But I think if at the end of the game, you just have like one network call in your app and, you already have, then it's debatable whether you should go and put all that, because I think already with SwiftUI, what kind of makes it really powerful is this concept here that in your view model, once, whether you go on the completion way or whatever, once you change this property, once its state has changed, then iOS just does the right thing, that if this is being referenced anywhere in the SwiftUI and it sees it as an observed object, it will just go and update the UI. And that's really powerful, where you don't have to go and in your completion also update the UI and all that. You don't have to do that. You just have to get, you have to just update the value of this and everything else kind of works for you. Any questions? I feel like I just talked a lot.
I have one. Suppose you're on a very slow network call and you type a city name, tap on search, and immediately go change the city name and again tap on search. There will be two publishers created, right? The first one is still in the works and the second one gets created. Probably we can cancel the previous publisher if that is the case, right?
And I think that would be the right thing to do. So that whole cancelable here. Now, this one has it in the view model. I think it might be better to actually have it, I didn't, right now they're kind of doing not the best thing here, that you have this fetch weather is like a static function. So it's what we could do is make this like an actual object where, you call, it has its own cancelable, right? And when you're calling like fetch weather, it can check to see if any of those like cancelables are, if there is any cancelables there. Because I believe that once the cancelable is like, when you're storing it, like once it's done, then that cancelable goes away.
Oh,
and-
from the set?
yeah, I'm assuming. So it would make sense. Otherwise, like you're, kind of keeping it forever, which doesn't make sense. It's kind of like similar to like what people do, like, even in a traditional thing, when you have this data task, not the publisher, you do get that URL task, right? And a lot of people, they actually store that URL task for a certain, whatever the request or the URL was. So in case you get it again, if that URL task exists, you can cancel it. But I'm assuming that once, like, it's like, and when that one, you kind of handle it yourself, because once you get the response, you kind of clean up your cache of the URL task. It'll be interesting to know if in the store, and we can try that, if in the store, if it's done, is that cancelable still there or not? But that would be the right thing to do, that we would check, and if it's there, then we would cancel that one and then start a new one. So as you were saying, we're not just, have these existing publishers that are just going on, right?
Yeah, memory leaks. Yeah.
Yeah. Because especially you can see that for certain kind of searches, like people are constantly changing, for this one, maybe not as much, because, someone is just like, oh, what's the weather in Toronto? But for some other ones, they're constantly trying to get different results. And then that wouldn't be good, that you're just accruing, like, see, Jay says, sorry, I need to draw. Okay. But that would be, I'll put this code as it is. I'll keep working on it to update mine. But if anyone kind of wants to take off from where right now we have it and try some of the ideas that we talked about, like hooking up the location, possibly seeing if there's a way we can, clean up these publishers, if we can give it a try.
Have we forked the original repository, and from there are we branching off, or how are we doing it?
I have, so right now this is local to me, but I would assume that, oh, that's a good, Navati, what do you think is the best? Because we don't want just one, and kind of one solution, right?
Oh, I mean, we could all upload our solutions, right? Like in a folder I've created.
Yeah, maybe that's one way. Or different other ways, like different branches off of that, so you can have your solution there. Because there's no one perfect solution, unlike a lot of other code where it's like, so I would say, like, I would branch, either, or I could create a folder. What do people prefer, folder or branch?
I feel branch is better, because we can do a code diff and see what changes you have made.
Exactly. Folder seemed, let's do a branch. So, and then you just even put your name, as kind of like
the branch,
weather, and then, sort of work on that.
Yeah.
So we'll fork the original project into this folder, the one that I just shared here, and then from there we can all create our branches.
Yeah, that makes sense. That way we can see all the changes Monika has made, and understand her changes.
And then we have like 2 weeks. So I think just so that the momentum is there, if you can find a little bit of time, just play with this.
Okay.
And then, because kind of part of it is just to get comfortable with this.
Mhm.
And I didn't have time to also try some of the errors, like to do things that would cause an error just to see what happens. And again, the other really good one is, I think it's a good pattern, is like in your view model, you also want to have either the error itself or the error message so that you can map that to that so you can display it, because that's kind of a common thing to do. And right now we're sort of eating away those errors and no one knows. So, yeah. Well, I hope this was useful. So let's keep the momentum. I'll do some work definitely this weekend on updating this, and I'll let you guys know on the Slack channel when I've updated it. And then everyone else, you guys try to, I'll push whatever I have and then create a branch from that and then keep updating based on that.
Awesome. Yeah. Let me know when you push and I'll quickly.
Okay.
put it in.
Yeah, I'll do that sometime today. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.